Thank you, Your Holiness. We are pleased to have with us Mr. Andrew Mitchell, and due to an oversight, his biography was not included. So I would like to give you this indication that Andrew Mitchell is the founder and director of the Global Canopy program at Oxford. He's a research associate in the zoology department there and a senior advisor to His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales's Rainforest project, and has 35 years working on conservation of tropical forests, and now his work is largely focused on climate change. So I welcome you to our podium, Andrew.
Thank you. Your Royal Holiness, Eminences, and distinguished delegates. Thank you very much for inviting me to come here this morning. I'm going to have a theme which is about connectedness with life, and I think one of the reasons that we are in the fix we are to do with climate change and some of these environmental issues is because of the dissociation we have between ourselves and nature. We've slightly forgotten what nature does for us, and I want to just follow through that theme in my talk today. But I'm going to begin by trying to reconnect you with my world, which is the tropical forests, and in particular the canopy of the tropical forest, that part of the forest that's most difficult to get to, up in the tops of the trees. And some of you who are in the Amazon may have seen this little film before. It's only 2 minutes and 10 seconds long. We made it in one day with film from the BBC and others, and some rather wonderful music, which I hope we will enjoy. So if you could just play the video now, just for a short moment, to reconnect us with the canopy world. Thank you. Not bad for a day's work, I think. But you will have seen some of the rather extraordinary techniques that I and my associates use to explore this unknown canopy world. It's a very hard part of our natural world to explore. And I think the canopy of the forest is a bit like the lining of our lungs. It's very delicate, very hard to reach. It's that interface between ourselves and the atmosphere. And of course, you can stop it working well if you fill it full of smoke. And that's exactly what we're doing with, in a sense, the canopy of the world's rainforest. So my title today, When is a Bug Worth $1 Billion? Slightly playful, but it goes to the point. In fact, the overarching theme of this session, which is pollution just a function of the fact that we don't price in the value of nature into our economy. And in the case of rainforests, I think that is the case, and I'll be trying to make that argument today. So the idea of the talk is to have a look at how we place a value on nature and what it does for us, using the Amazon forest as a case study, looking at forests, food, fire, and a little look into the future. I think to understand this, we need to go back a bit and just think a bit about where life came from and what it really does for us, and the enormity of what nature does for us as a species. We are one species now, about 6 billion, rising to 9 billion. We're the first to dominate the planet in the way that we are. And this collision between ourselves and life is what is causing an awful lot of our problems, of which climate change is really just one symptom. Life came from space, and in the early days on Earth, we should remind ourselves that the Earth was 95% CO2. Today, we only have 0.037% CO2. And how did that happen? Well, it happened because of life, because of nature. Originally, excreting oxygen as a byproduct, using up CO2. And that CO2 has been embedded in rocks from tiny animals in the ocean, but also from plant life. And this created our atmosphere, which allows us to breathe. Remember breathing in on our first day very gently through our noses and feeling the atmosphere going in and out. It is what allows us to live. It's about this compact between life and the earth. The atmosphere was created and a lot of oxygen in the earth. It's quite strange, isn't it, that now, so many billion years, about 4 billion years later, we're in a sense reversing that process. We're putting the CO2 back into the atmosphere like the poison that it is for us. The power of nature is enormous on a global scale. This is gross productivity, looking at the seasons moving up and down. In this image, you can see how the oceans pulse and the forests pulse as well, as the seasons change the way in which life interacts with the atmosphere. This, in a sense, is the kind of thermostat that's kept the Earth stable. Certainly we can see this in ice cores going back the last 400,000 years, but we've heard talks telling us that pretty much it's been very stable over many, many millions of years. This pulsing up and down as CO2 rises, it gets taken out of the atmosphere by nature, and that has stayed pretty much stable for a long time. And we're all familiar with how things are changing now with the CO2 going into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. It is the pace of that change that is so different. We have had these changes in the past. It's the pace that really is different, and the scale too, because the amounts are very large. And we know this story of the Greenland ice sheets changing. We saw 2 points on that graph, a little lower today. The blue scale there is what the science reckoned was going to happen. The red line is what has actually happened. And we can see that even the worst predictions were not as bad as what actually has happened. Now, the difference here between forest and ice is that we can't do anything about stopping the ice melting. Almost nothing we can do about that, because so much has happened with the amount of CO2 already in the atmosphere, but we can do something about deforestation. So let us think for a moment about these forests. What are they? What do they do for us? The conservation idea about forests that we've been, in a sense, sold over the last 30 years, and I've been trying to sell it, is that it is a collection of biodiversity that is very valuable for its existence value, and that is filled with remarkable people who live there in harmony with the forest. The problem with that conservation paradigm is that it doesn't work. It will not save forests, is not saving forests. Conservation can never stand up to commerce. So in the next 30 years, we must find a new way of looking at these forests, which will acquire a different kind of value. And the one I propose is that they are, in fact, a green machine that is a giant public utility that is providing services to us, just like a power station that is providing us with electricity. The difference is we're all using that electricity, but we are not paying for it. And those services, therefore, are not valued, so they're going to be eroded. The power station is being destroyed. To understand this power station is pretty hard. This is how we explore forest canopies on ropes like this. This is one of my trainers going up in the trees. Getting into my office every day is pretty hard. Anybody who wants to try this, we run training courses in Oxford, in our lovely oak trees there. They're like shrubs compared to rainforests, but, and also in Malaysia and Brazil. But just to remind ourselves of where these forests are, this is a scene of life and death around the green belt of the planet. Still huge, large areas in Amazonia, Congo Basin, and also, of course, in Southeast Asia, but being degraded rapidly in those red areas. The rate of loss, about 13 million hectares per year of tropical forests, of which about 5.5 million hectares every year are tropical rainforests, primary rainforests. That's a giant amount, about the size of Belgium every year. Another thing that we've learned more recently is that we've been studying the climate in these forests, using towers like this, which bristle with instruments that measure oxygen, carbon dioxide, heat, light, the fluxes, the breathing in and out of the forest to the atmosphere. And with this, we now know much more about how these forests really work. They are indeed not only a great store of carbon, which I'll come on to, but they are a massive rainfall creation mechanism. As you look over the Amazon, you will see these low-level clouds that produce gigantic amounts of rain. And just to show this on a global context, here are 2 years of satellite data from a NASA TRMM satellite. The orange bits are storm tracks, the white stuff is moisture. These forests are not the lungs of the earth. They are its beating heart, pumping moisture around huge distances and also heat. This combination of the carbon cycle, the water cycle, and heat energy is very important when dealing with forests. Just take a look at the Amazon there on the right-hand side of your screen. You will see the moisture is coming in from the Atlantic. Remember Gorshkov and Maria Kava's video about them acting as biotic pumps. A controversial theory, but possibly quite likely. On the coastlines, they pump moisture inland, it goes around the Amazon, hits up against the Andes, and then goes down south in a plume, watch it, across to South Africa. Some of this moisture is spilling out north, out into the Caribbean. And that raises a very important connection between the Amazon and what happened here in New Orleans. This is a question I raise. We don't have the science to answer this. But the cooling influence of these forests on the land surface is immense, probably between 3 and 5 degrees. It doesn't sound much, but it's very, very important. And the reason why we got Katrina and several other hurricanes like it is because of the sea surface temperature being so high. I'll come back to that in just one moment. So you see the trade winds coming on, they get recycled across the Amazon. So this is about water. 3 trillion tons of it stored, 8 trillion tons of it every year being released into the atmosphere. If you put that over London, it's about 28 meters of flooding every day. I haven't done the calculation for New Orleans. It's absolutely enormous. And remember that there's about $1 trillion worth of industry that depends, not industry, but agriculture and hydropower that depends on that water in the La Plata Basin further south. So these forests are intimately connected to the agricultural and energy security of the region and further. How does it happen? Rain doesn't occur over a rainforest by chance. These trees release chemistry into the atmosphere, what we call volatile organic compounds, which oxidize in sunlight. They create small condensation nuclei, and around these, water droplets form. A lot of vapor is transpired up into the atmosphere, and low, warm clouds form over the Amazon in that way. When you take away the trees and cut down the forest, you replace these nuclei with soot. These are coarse and larger droplets form around these, which are carried up high up into the atmosphere. Why? Because the forest is gone, the land surface temperature rises. You get much more convection, so you get these huge clouds going up, and it forms ice and violent storms. You replace this virtuous system with a violent system. This is my bug. This is the worker in the public utility. It's a wonder of evolution, a leaf with legs. It even looks like it has holes in it. Yet these little tiny animals are the instruments that drive that machine. But who will give me $1 billion for that bug? No one. Conservation can't raise money for biodiversity. Not really. And yet we need billions of dollars to save these forests. So how do we do that? Let's look at the food. The food is our food, and the food of the people who live there is an important part of this story as to why forests are disappearing. Forests fall very, very simply because they're worth more dead than alive. This simple sentence I put out a few years ago, and it's amazing how it's now going around the world, helped no less by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. It's such a simple statement, and yet is utterly true. What we have to do to turn this around is make forests worth more standing up than they are cut down. It's as simple as that. If you're a poor family living in the forest, somebody offers you $10 to cut a tree, and you're trying to feed your children, what are you going to do? Of course you're going to cut it. They're not doing it because they're stupid. We therefore have a crisis of values. We talked about imagery the other day. That's not an atom bomb, it's just smoke coming out of the burning Amazon. This crisis of values is colliding between food security, energy security, and environmental security. All of these things are on a collision course. And if we do not tackle this, we will not win the fight against climate change. What are the drivers? Well, you can see in the middle there, about 42% is subsistence farmers, poor people who are just eating away into the forest to make a living for food. Why? They cut the trees for energy. That's why they have to get the wood, to cook, to clean water, because their water is foul in many cases. But look on the left-hand side, over 30% of the drivers of deforestation are to do with the food business, commercial agriculture, and wood extraction over on the right. We'll tease that apart a bit. Here are poor people living in the forest. There are about 1.4 billion people around the world who depend indirectly or directly on products from forests for their livelihood. It's a huge number of people. These are the people who often don't have title to their land. This is a question of justice. Often about 70% of forest lands are claimed by governments, not by the local people who live there. And this is a huge difficulty. We don't actually know who really owns the forests, and that's one of the major barriers in dealing with the international negotiations. These poor people, though, need our help, and their voices need to be heard. I'll just tell you a story. I was in the Amazon last month. This is Amia. She's a Guarani from Ecuador. She is one of the few people who's gone out of the forest into the wider world. To do that, she has to give up the chance to be married. She's been selected because she's bright. She can use a laptop just as well as I can. And she goes out across the world with other members of her community to try and understand why their homes are being destroyed. The biggest driver there is not food, it's oil. Oil underneath the forests. You can get a small village of a few hundred people. Oil is found there, the government allows the oil companies in, and their village is swamped by 1,000 oil workers who bring drugs, alcohol, cash into the economy where before there was none, and totally upsets everything. They don't like this, they fight. They fight with their lives. Just a month before she came here and met me, a tribe next door to her had loggers illegally logging their lands, coming in. They told them once, they told them twice, and then they shot them with arrows. This is the sort of battle these people face. And they lead, their whole civilization has just collapsed since the Europeans first arrived, and it's a process which is still going on, extremely difficult to deal with. We'll come back to that. So we carve up the Congo, we carve up these forests because we want the timber, huge amounts of it. Still today, about 80% of timber supplies come from natural forests. There will be no solution to this problem of getting hardwood timbers out of the forest unless we supply an alternative. That means we need plantations, and lots of them. The carbon sequestration qualities of plantations is cream on top. But essentially, this is about wood. But I'll just go back to that. Just think about it. Congo DRC, the largest area of rainforest left in Africa, how much money does the government make from selling its timber in taxes each year? I'll tell you. It's $27 million. That's all. There are plenty of companies here in this country who could pay that off and save the forests without even really noticing it. Why does all this happen? On the one side, we have the magic of biodiversity. On the other side, the banks, the investors. It's no contest, as I've already explained. Biodiversity will never stand up to these drivers of deforestation, which are hugely powerful, billions of dollars. And where do those drivers come from? We'll look at that too. Demand and poverty, the major drivers of deforestation. But today, the big increase is in beef, soya, palm oil, and timber. These products, which we all use, which come right across the world to feed us. Cattle is the principal driver of deforestation in Amazonia today. You can see here a very simple graph. It makes the point. The herd is growing fast in Brazil to feed their own people, but also for export, increasingly to India and China. As people get richer, they want to eat more beef. They want to double their herd in the next 10 years or less. What's that going to do to forests? Well, this is what it will do to the Amazon by 2030, according to the best scientific scenarios. If this happens, we will totally break up that giant public utility. We won't get so much rain. A lot of carbon will have gone into the atmosphere, and the local people who live there will have their lives turned upside down. Why is this happening? It's because of products that you and I eat every day, which contain these products from the forest without even realizing it. It's what I call the hidden elephant in the living room of climate change. Food goes in, the soy goes into chickens and pigs, the palm oil goes into cosmetics, etc. Consumerism, therefore, drives deforestation, and the businesses which supply it are in the chain. And this is not to blame anyone. I'm not, for one moment, I don't believe in this blame game. We're all in this together. This is a problem we have to learn to deal with. When you wash your face in the morning with soap, or put cosmetics on your face, or eat some beef, or put it on a barbecue, it may be containing the Amazon. Most people don't know that. We have to figure out how to deal with that. This is what The Sun in our newspaper said was the primary cause of global warming. But there's a key point behind this. It's consumerism. The fire. What is the result? I'll just show you a little film here which I think makes the point quite effectively. Someone you might know.
When rainforests get slashed and burned, it releases tons of carbon into the air we breathe. It changes our climate. It hurts. Every bit of rainforest that gets ripped out over there really hurts us over here.
The point is that, you know, a lot of this is about messages. We can go on making all the science case we want. But I think, and one thing I've really felt in this symposium, is that we're asking the wrong question. We're going on putting science in front of people, but they don't get it. The real research is into our own stupidity for not reacting to the evidence. Here's some of the evidence. The smoke going out. Trees contain somewhere between 100 and 400 tons per hectare of carbon in the soil. That's what goes up in smoke when you burn them. Underneath the soil, they contain more. In the peat forests of Southeast Asia, there may be as much as 1,000 or 2,000 tons of carbon embedded in the peat. Take away the trees, that erodes and oxidizes, releasing huge amounts into the atmosphere. Now, this cost is not on the balance sheet of food production or timber production or soy or anything. It's the externalities story. The Amazon River dried up in 2005. This was a shock to everybody there. How could the wettest place that you could imagine be dry? No ships, no water ambulances. Look at the effects there that happened to local people. We think that somewhere between $3 to $5 trillion a year is lost in the value of ecosystem services. And this figure from Pavan Sukhdev, who hopefully was going to speak to us here at this meeting. Look out for the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, his reports, which will be coming out in the next 6 months. The sum is gigantic. Notice it's about 3 to 4 times the credit crunch that we've just been through, but you won't see it on the front page of any newspaper. There'll be no solution to climate change without a solution to deforestation. Just look at the numbers. 2% for aircraft, we do worry about that. But forests, 18%. It's bigger than the entire transport sector around the globe. Here's the key point. Over on the right-hand side there, that's the cost of sequestration using industrial methods, sequestration, putting machines on power stations to take the CO2 out of the atmosphere. The green bit is the cost of doing it with forests. This is the McKinsey cost curve. On the left-hand side, those are things that might make money, such as putting new light bulbs in. You'll notice that forests, the green bits, are on the cheap end of the spectrum, cheap and fast. It may cost as much as $1,000 a ton to take it out of the atmosphere using machines, down to maybe $500. There's a range of costs. Forests are largely doing it for free. So it's 20% of the problem, but it could offer 40% of the solution between now and 2030. That's a key point. These industrial methods will take years to come on stream. We can deal with forests now. Natural CCS is enormous, possibly worth $1 billion, but its value today, many, many billions, its value today is zero. Just like a little fun look at the politics. This is how most industrialized countries look at climate change. I'm in charge, I can keep emitting, it's all about machines. This is how people in developing countries see it. Giant, unstoppable, not their fault. This is how we generally react. You know, you put a frog in cold water, heat it up, it doesn't jump out. You put it in hot water, it jumps out. Well, we're in the cold water, watching it happen. So who will jump first? There are political, technical roadblocks and all of these things, which I don't have time to go into today when dealing with this. We need to gain a lot of political momentum, and that is happening right up to the Kyoto meeting and the Copenhagen meeting. I hope that forests will actually produce one of the best outcomes. The Forest Now Declaration, which I started a couple of years ago, signed up by a number of presidents and ministers, really helped to gather attention on this issue at the Bali talks, and we got forests in for the first time into the carbon dialogue. So what's the vision going forward to 2030? How do we not be 37 years late? That's roughly what we're on the track to be for 2050. We're going to be about 37 years late with our current plans. We need to pull that back. The key thing is, you know, we can't get out of this problem with the same thinking that got us into it, you know, Einstein's thing. We do have to think differently. We have to think at scale. We're talking here about 17 to 33 billion a year to halve deforestation. This is not a small amount of money, but it is entirely achievable. Even just a fraction of a percent of the global insurance market would pay for this. $3 trillion, a tiny percent of the insurance market would pay for this. It could be the best insurance we could all have for our planet. We have to act now. We don't have time because forests can't be rebuilt. We won't let them. This is the negotiations that are going on in the UN. It's very slow. I won't go into that right now, but RED, reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation, that's the thing that has some hope. And anyone who's interested in that can read my little red book here all about it. Shock tactics can work. Slaughtering the Amazon, a report that came out earlier this year, it was like a bombshell in Brazil. Companies that were targeted, that were shown to be using products from the forest, reacted quickly. Walmart, Carrefour, internationally known names. Even British supermarkets are being targeted by the Brazilian government for, in a sense, receiving stolen goods. This is bringing about change rapidly, and we have to bring about change. Forest footprint disclosure. Everyone in this room needs to understand their own forest footprint. But business does too, and the investors and asset managers that fund this process. I have started something called the Forest Footprint Disclosure, launched in June this year, backed by $3 trillion of investors and asset managers that are calling for companies to disclose their forest footprints. Our first report will be out in January this year. But I think the deeper question that we in this symposium should try and ask is this one, posed by Bill Clinton when I was at his meeting in New York. Are we really creating wealth that's worth having? All these banks, all of us who get rich in these countries, we are immensely wealthy in this room compared to the poor people who I deal with in these countries. And the wealth we are creating is damaging their lives. And that is really the deeper question that we must all ask going forward into the 20th century economy. We are altering course with his help from His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. We had a meeting earlier this year. We got 18 leaders around the world to agree an interim program, or to look at it, an intergovernmental working group. We are hoping to get some $20 billion starting next year over 5 years to try and tackle this problem immediately whilst we wait for the UN mechanisms to come on stream. We'll hear more about that in a meeting in November the 19th, but it's work ongoing. I'll leave that. So really, we do have to think as we grow our huge wealth around the world that can we really start investing in natural capital? What we are eroding is natural capital all around the world. We need to find a way to bring natural capital onto the balance sheet so that we have social and financial capital, but also natural capital in balance in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for your bringing us to a deeper reflection, descriptive and reflexive on the color red. There are questions, please, Mary Evelyn. And Fred, I think Fred second, Mary Evelyn, I had her on, and then you're next, and we'll limit it just to 2, so Fred.
Just very, very briefly, thank you so much for your work, and Hilton's as well in this regard. It's extraordinary, and bringing this great talent. So my question is a very friendly one, but perhaps in light of a conference like this that celebrates religion, science, and the environment, that the metaphors that we were referring to yesterday when John was speaking about how metaphors drive the action, I would just love for us all to rethink green machine, because machine comes out of the metaphor of the world that in some ways is manipulative, which is for human resource use. So that even the notion of nature as resource rather than source of life is something I think we have to put into the equation. I understand fully why ecosystem services is a critical economic tool, and it works in a financial mindset. But nature can never be valued only by an economic sensibility. And my final comment would be the IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, is developing an ethics working group precisely to say, how do we value nature that's not just economically driven? So I say this with immense thanks for what you are doing, and just also hoping that we can collectively figure out the green web of life in contrast to, but in relation to, the green machine. Thank you for your work.
Would you like me just to comment quickly on that? Thank you. Thank you for that question. I also wanted to pay tribute to Hilton, who's been an enormous help to me. I'm a biologist. He comes from the business world, and the two of us have been able to overlap our ideas. You're absolutely right. The problem is that existence value doesn't work. It's not enough to turn back the tide of commerce that is sweeping across these forests. We can wring our hands for another decade about how we value them. Meanwhile, they're being cut down. We have to take risks. We're in a very risky situation here, and therefore, when we think differently, I think we have to take risks. And I worry a lot about the commodification of nature, but the global commons is something which is out there and being plundered. And unless we find a way to put a value on it, either economically or in some other way, we're going to lose it. Yeah. It's certainly there. Of course, you know, I've been studying biodiversity all my life. I love it, wrap my hands around it, but that doesn't make the difference.
Let's take in one more question briefly, Fred.
Thank you for the wonderful vision connecting how the forests are crucial for our lives. What we also need to hear is what are the particular actions that we can take as individuals and churches to make a difference. And so what we need is a checklist. How do we enter into an action that begins to acknowledge the importance of the forest and take away from those actions that are leveling the forests?
Thank you for that. Well, yes, we do all need. The problem is we feel dissociated sometimes, and how do we affect it? Well, one of the things we'll be doing through the Forest Footprint Project is identifying the kinds of products that we'll use every day that we could call on our companies to produce better. It's not about stopping palm oil, it's about making it better and producing food better. We've heard that a lot in this conference. We need to do that, and the forest component is part of it. So we'll be coming out with that next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.